Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest webinar from 43 Alumni for Biden. My name is John FARNER, part of the organizing committee of the organization. I'm joined by some familiar faces and one that should be familiar to you, but has not spoken to our organization yet. That is Olivia Troye, and we'll be introducing her in a second. First, I want to recognize my fellow organizing committee members. And before we get started as well, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you can utilize either the chat function or the Q&A function, any questions for Olivia or any of us throughout the webinar, please type that in there. Let us know. We can funnel those questions to Olivia, no problem at all. We envision this to be a very conversational presentation for you tonight and talking about all kinds of different things related to the current situation in the White House, Olivia's experience there, and wherever the conversation takes us. So first, Karen Kirksey, who's our director of the PAC, is with me, as well as Genevieve Hartley, and then Chris Purcell. I'll throw it off to you to say a few words.
Yeah, thanks, John. I guess first of all, I got my Willie Nelson for Biden shirt today. I haven't ordered a fly swatter yet, so I don't know if any of you guys have done that. But anyways, good evening. So at the outset, when we started this group, we wanted to help create a safe place for 43 alumni and Republicans and others to step up and speak out about the damage being done to the country by Donald Trump and why we need to elect Joe Biden to change course. And so working with our partner organizations like RVAT, I think we've collectively done a pretty good job of that. And because that safe place exists, we've seen former members of the Trump administration also step forward. And, we think it's really important that not only they do so, so the American people can hear what is really happening on the inside, but it's also important so that when we're talking to, soft Republicans, people who are persuadable, that we can give them some real information that we've heard, directly from people who were there. So we invited Olivia on tonight to talk about what is really happening inside the White House and the coronavirus task force, because we've all seen now just in this, last week or so, just how reckless the president has been about the pandemic, and even about the health of him personally and those who are around him. So Olivia was the Vice President's Homeland Security Advisor and on the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And she's also a 43 alum. She was in the Career Intelligence Service after that, and she's voting for Joe Biden. And we really appreciate you being here, Olivia. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for having me tonight.
Olivia, I think we just wanted to maybe start off with your thoughts on the debate last night, and then you can go into your time at the White House and on the task force, and then we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Well, personally, I have to tell you, last night it was a hard night for me. I knew it would be tough, just because it was, for me, it's just it's very personal, right? Watching some of these topics be talked about and watching the Vice President talk about them as well, and knowing that, knowing him and knowing the team there, I just knew that he was in a pretty challenging, difficult situation going into this debate, given everything that it has happened the last couple of days, given the president's behavior, the things he said. So it was just, I was watching the debate, looking at both candidates, seeing what they were saying in it, but it was a little bit, it was just a little bit of a unique situation for me, because I've never been in that situation before, where I'm watching someone that I know that well, and then just having been so outspoken like I have been, because I have very strong feelings about the things that I saw happen. And, and I think I have to say I was a little bit surprised that the VP at times I felt was that when he would speak over Kamala that way, I guess it was certainly not as bad as what the president did, but knowing the VP and knowing that his, he tends to be a true gentleman, I was a little bit surprised by that, the way he was behaving sort of towards her. And I get it. He's a debater. He's a talk show, former radio host. But sort of things like that bothered me a little bit. And then in terms of the COVID responses, it wasn't anything different than what I was expecting. he is so used to having to deal with, figuring out how to pivot from hard questions. He's had to do this throughout the entire pandemic in various situations where the president would say something and he'd be next to speak, or we would be on the road, or we would be dealing with some major task force issues that were challenging and during a crisis. And I think, the responses he gave were the responses he's probably given along the way in terms of press conferences. But I also saw, he really did not get into the substance of it. And I think that was unfortunate. There are some positive stories to tell about the task force work. Certainly there was a lot of hard work. He could have talked about that, but instead I saw him really, protect and defend the president and not really explain a lot of it. And I guess, that's who Mike Pence is, and that's his job, and he stayed true to that during the debate.
So let's talk about your experience a little bit in the coronavirus task force. One of the things that, when we talk to our friends and family, right, because we're all 43 alumni, most of us are still consider ourselves Republicans. The response is, well, what could else the president have done? The president did all he could. What could Joe Biden have done? And you're right. I think, I see the picture of Dr. Fauci behind you from Time Magazine. And all of us have the utmost respect for Dr. Fauci. And you're absolutely right. The coronavirus task force did do a lot of good work. A lot of good information came from the task force. And it seemed like there was a little push and pull coming from the political side of things as well. From your experience, let's talk about that question. What could have been done in your opinion? Feel free to talk about what you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable, don't worry about it. But just how do we answer that question to people who ask us?
Yeah, I think what I saw firsthand was people who were very committed and working long hours and tirelessly from day one. And I was on the task force since mid-January. I was in every single meeting, starting at that time from when the initial interagency working group was convened on it. We were tracking closely what was going on in Wuhan, and I was there for the initial task force meetings before the vice president was tasked to lead it in late February. And I think, with the virus at the very beginning, there were so many unknowns about it, right? We didn't have access into China. That was critical. CDC was trying to get in with the WHO. They were, that took weeks for us to get in on the ground so that CDC could actually assess the situation for themselves, figure out, they lost time on figuring out how does the virus spread. They couldn't observe it firsthand. We were playing the guessing game, but given the rate that it was spreading at in Wuhan, we certainly had clear indications of how contagious it was and how deadly it was fairly early on, I would say by late January. And, there were still questions about, there were things that we learned along the way, like the aerosol and how it spreads. And that was a key thing, right, to learn along the way. And also the asymptomatic spreading. I will say that right there is a game changer. When someone you're sitting next to shows no symptoms and is shedding the virus, that's a pretty scary thing, right? That's another layer to consider on how are you going to counter this pandemic. But what I'll say was the hardest thing, and I think where this whole response sort of went sideways, regardless of working on PPE because we didn't have enough in the stockpile, and also when we don't make masks domestically, a lot of this stuff we've exported out and we bring it in from overseas. And when you're in a global pandemic, that's a major problem when everyone is trying to get access to the same kind of stuff. Everyone needs gowns. Everyone is running out of masks. Everyone needs PPE for their medical workers. And our goal was to make sure that we were doing our best to make sure that the medical community and the hospitals wouldn't get overwhelmed. The issue that I saw, though, is it's very hard to be doing all those things behind the scenes and dealing with the evacuations of cruise ships and all these hard things. And then you have the president come out at the very beginning and he calls it a hoax. And I think that just set the tone for everything, because when you have someone in the Oval Office who is communicating to the American people with a message that is just flat out false. It's a flat out lie. It's misinformation coming from the very top. That really is going to set the tone for how the American people are going to perceive it. Right. And there's going to be a group out there that, I mean, words matter, especially when you're the president of the United States. And there's going to be a group of people that are going to be watching this who I think today still believe this isn't real, even though people around us are suffering from it. And we're seeing how many people are dying. And I think that the biggest detriment to the task force was that it was the rhetoric that surrounded it. It was the discrediting of the public health agencies along the way as well. You know, there were certainly articles that came out about Dr. Fauci and how he was always wrong, or articles about even Dr. Birx. I saw her personally hurt. I saw the hurt that New York Times hit piece like had on her. And I call it a hit piece because, you know, when you're behind the scenes in the White House, you hear how things are happening. And we knew fully well that article came from within. And so did she. And I can't tell you what it's like to be in the task force and watch these experts who are known in their fields for pandemics, who are sitting there wrestling with these problems, trying to give the VP the best advice they can and coming together, and watching them react, and me personally knowing them so well, waking up in the morning or seeing a tweet that's attacking one of them or seeing an article. And I think, you know, I say that that's a critical part of the response and what went wrong, because all of that combined has an impact. It has an impact on how people are going to behave. It has an impact for human behavior. It has an impact on, you know, the mask, the politicization of a mask, politicizing such a basic thing like that we know is actually a big game changer in terms of slowing the spread of the virus. It's just a fundamental thing. And Americans already, we're not used to wearing masks, right? That's not who we are. It's not familiar in our communities. I think you see it in overseas countries. You see it, I think, in Asian countries, and they're used to sort of, they're more familiar with it. They're more comfortable with, you know, and we're used to our freedoms. We're America, the land of the free. We're not used to shutting down. We're used to having our way. These are all challenges that we were already going to have to wrestle with as a community and a country together, right? And we did the you know, you'll remember the administration did the 15 days to slow the spread, and then we extended it another 30 because we saw that it was actually making a difference. We saw it slowing. We saw communities that were actually, you know, we were seeing some hotspots where cases were decreasing. But when you have that and you contrast it to what the president and the message coming out of the White House saying this isn't real, or you don't need a mask, or making fun of people with masks, or you send out the VP to the Mayo Clinic and there's pressure there, political dynamic to encourage him, or basically flat out not have him wear a mask in a medical facility where there are recovering COVID patients who are donating plasma that, you know, I think the research is still kind of, you know, there's still studies being done on the effects of it. But we were clearly told that it could be a tool in the toolkit and we should encourage donations of it. Because going into the fall, which we're approaching right now, we're in the fall now, and in the winter, we were well aware that cases were going to increase and we might be in a really bad situation. And I think I heard Dr. Fauci and some other experts, medical experts that are not on the task force today, talking about the fact that they're very concerned about this period that we're going in seasonally and the concerns and the challenges of it. And I think that fundamentally there was a dynamic that we were never going to overcome, no matter what kind of work was done in the task force. You cannot overcome when the president of the United States, as you saw in his Evita moment on the balcony or whatever the heck that was, when he has COVID and he doesn't care. He didn't care about the staff. I mean, when I heard that the head of security has it and he's so gravely ill, I was horrified. I was so sad. And then I was like, what must he be thinking when he's watching the news and he's fighting for his life in the hospital and he sees the president of the United States on the balcony taking the mask off and bragging about, and then most recently bragging about how it's a blessing. And I think about the disrespect shown to families in that too, right? I don't think that any of these families, anyone who's had it or anyone who's lost a loved one anywhere in the world would call that a blessing. So, I mean, yeah, I think that's fundamentally the one thing that really derailed all of it.
So what were some of the discussions like, inside the task force about, the president and vice president wearing masks in public, if for no other reason than to lead by example?
There's certainly a lot of discussion in the task force about the importance of wearing a mask. At the beginning, we didn't know. We didn't know the rate of spread of the virus, and we were still trying to figure out how much it was here in the United States. That is a fair thing. We may have gotten it wrong. I'm not disputing that. There was a lot of conflicting information that we were dealing with out of China. We were wrestling with that as well. But along the way, it becomes very clear, and all of the doctors then are united on this front, where a mask is basically the best way right now to get ahead of this. We don't have a vaccine. A vaccine takes time, and no matter how focused they are, the scientists, and I know that there's a lot of amazing work being done at NIH and with a lot of the pharma companies and partnerships, but that doesn't happen overnight. And, in the task force, people agree to it. And the vice president would say, yeah, you're right, it's important. We did the signs and we talked about it, but then politically, it was never executed by the president and even the vice president. They would travel when they started to open up the country again, and they would try to encourage places to not enforce the mask rule. And quite frankly, we got some pushback. I know for a fact that we got pushback from a lot of companies and industries that said, well, with all due respect, realize we would love for you all to come here, but setting the tone like that, we have our workforce and our employees are wearing masks, and I can't sit here as a CEO or the CEO of a company without a mask and standing with you all. What kind of leadership example does that set? And it would be unfair to our employees. And I was like, there is someone who gets it, right? At the very top.
Quick question. So walk us through sort of the timeline between when they started the briefings, and then Pence was sort of in charge, and then Trump came along and he was in charge, and then they just fell off the cliff. Then they just stopped. What happened with that?
Well, so what you see early on is the controlling of the messaging, and someone misspoke. And you'll see a lot of the time that that's how they refer to it, right? They'll say Larry Kudlow misspoke. I think he did that recently. I think I said something like, wow, he misspeaks a lot, because I've heard him say a lot in meetings, and I'm sure he was misspeaking then. And, I'm not trying to be smart about it. It's just a pattern. It's the truth. And I think what you saw was a CDC expert, right? A career CDC expert who knows pandemics, who understands what is happening here. And she gives a briefing. I think she was doing their usual CDC press briefings, which, by the way, that's normal. In normal times during a pandemic, the CDC will do briefings or during an outbreak of something just to inform the general public. That is traditionally what the CDC does. And you will notice that there have been no briefings really by the CDC throughout the last few months, which is not really how it normally works. And after that, it was decided that the messaging really needed to be locked down, because they didn't want, they wanted to be very careful about what was being relayed to the public. That was also around the time when the stock market plummeted for the very first time. And they were certainly keeping tabs on that. And, the president has run on a platform that's jobs and economy. And that was where their mindset was at. So the VP gets tasked to lead this task force. It's a thankless job. It just is. It's a no-win situation to get put on that role, because no matter what, especially, going into an election, we were in an election year, and how challenging it was and how the magnitude of this pandemic, it was going to be hard. And he then gets tasked with that. And you see the press briefings commence, and you see our comm shop, and they really cracked down. They said nothing goes out without us reviewing it, no guidances, no policies. That's where you start to see a little bit of the control of what the public health community is putting out, what they're telling the public about this virus. And then, the vice president got pretty good at these briefings. I've had the conversation with him where he said, don't give me the flowery language. I just want the facts. I just want to communicate the facts to the American people, or just I want to be the informer. And then he would let the doctors brief. Like, so Dr. Brooks would do her briefings and talk about statistics and data. But then you see that sort of shift because the data is not really fitting the narrative that everything's okay, that everything's getting back to normal. And then you see doctors not show up at the briefings. And then you see Dr. Fauci not show up at all. And remember, there was a whole period there where people were like, where is Dr. Fauci? I think that was trending on social media for a while because they were used to seeing him. And they know that he is the national treasure that he is. And they were worried. There was also concern about his health, right? Because it's COVID. And so there was all that speculation happening behind the scenes. And the truth is, I mean, they were manipulating who was going in front of the press briefings on purpose because they wanted to really crack down on what was being said to the American people, and we weren't being necessarily forthcoming. I'm aware that the president thought the vice president was getting a little bit too good at the briefings and was getting a little bit too much attention. You may have seen that reported along the way, and from what I could tell, I guess that's pretty accurate because the president says, you know, I'm going to do briefings now and I'm going to join the briefings too. And unfortunately, you know, the president would get up and sometimes he would be right on message for the first 2 minutes of the briefing. And then in typical President Trump fashion, the briefing would quickly go off the rails. And that's how you end up with situations of inject yourself with bleach. And that's how you'll be safe from COVID. I mean, that's just mind blowing to me that is actually a real story that the entire, you know, nation watched.
So it's 25 after, very conscious of your time. Let's talk about the decision for you to leave your career of civil service and what brings you us here to us here today. Go through that process. I don't know if it was just 1,000 paper cuts or something that broke Campbell's back. What drove you to come out publicly and as vocal as you have been to speak out against the actions of the current president and this administration and support Joe Biden's candidacy for president?
You know, I worked in the White House for over 2 years. I saw a lot of things happen firsthand, right? I had the Homeland portfolio. I covered mass shootings. I covered natural disasters. You've seen Miles Taylor. I can tell you, I can verify he is 100% telling you the truth. I worked with the Resilience Directorate. I know what disaster declarations were held back. I know what funding and relief was held back for California. I was in the White House for it while he was living it from the DHS aspect. So I've seen a lot of these different things, such as what Elizabeth Newman has talked about in terms of, you know, white supremacy and the terms and how we had to play it down. You know, they were seeing it from DHS. I was seeing it. I was living it. I was living it every day in the White House because I was a Homeland person. And during the COVID task force time, I mean, I just saw a lot of egregious things over time. And it's hard. You stay because you want to make a difference. And for me, it was hard for me to make the decision to leave the vice president's team because I really felt that I felt like I played a critical role in the task force for these people. And at times I was the person that helped them manage and strategize on how we were going to tackle the agenda the next day to make sure that whatever policy CDC was trying to negotiate with people that shouldn't be negotiating with them because they don't have the right background to even know where to start on what the scientists are saying. And I felt like leaving would be detrimental to the situation and hurtful to them because they were part of the team. I mean, I joke about this, but I called the task force members sometimes my kids. That's how I felt about them. I really tried to protect them at times, and we had some really deep heart-to-heart conversations behind closed doors about things we saw and how we would manage it the next day because we knew what mattered. It was important to Americans, and that's really why I kept hanging in there. But at some point, as the closer to the election that we got, the political forces just got increasingly harder, and I felt like I was walking a real fine line between compromising my morals and my integrity. And it was getting harder every day to really live with that. And, you know, that I've talked about this a little bit, but publicly, but the Lafayette Square incident really bothered me. That was truly, I think that was the lowest of the lowest points, which is not really COVID related, even though I was worried about, what was happening and watching the protests and things. But it was just really egregious for me to do that pomp and circumstance, to watch the president clear out protesters in such a violent manner. Like, I walked outside that day. I walked the White House grounds that day. I saw the protesters firsthand, I think an hour or half hour. And I didn't see anything majorly violent happening. I saw people on their knees. I saw them holding signs. I saw it firsthand. And then I went in and got cleared out with an email and saying, well, you got to get out. You got to get out. And, the days after that, I just kept thinking, and there were celebrations, by the way. There were celebrations amongst the staff about how they'd shown the protesters and all that. And for someone who cares about the homeland and operates in the space I do, and I really care about our law enforcement, I love our law enforcement, and I just thought, like, where am I working where they're encouraging this? I mean, the president encourages the protest, and he thinks, he's the law and order president, but he's putting these people even more at risk. He puts our law enforcement at risk, and he puts our communities at risk. And it was just the hypocrisy of that moment. I could never get over it. And I continued in my role. I continued working very hard. And that combined with the increasing behind the scenes shenanigans that I was seeing firsthand, including, at the top level of the White House and on the vice president's team, was just a breaking point for me. And, I resigned. I had a conversation with my leadership. I was asked to stay regardless of, apparently I was walked out and fired. I am still waiting for the footage of that from Secret Service, from my buddies who sit at some of the kiosks that I know well. I'm still waiting for it. And they know the truth about what happened at the end of the day. And I know that they come out, and I know General Kellogg well, and he was #1 fan of the president. I knew, I was a little surprised that he went that far, because I had a heart to heart with him about everything. And he only, he knows the truth. And then, I left, and I felt that staying at DHS, I just wasn't going to be able to get away from this circle of influence and this fear. And even though I was a career person, I was a career intel officer, but I had been too close to the fire. And I have friendships there. I still have friendships there. And I thought about it very hard. And I just decided it was time for me to just completely take a step back and remove myself from it. And in the weeks after, when you're watching it from the outside and you're not in it every single day, you're watching what the American public has been watching. It's a totally different lens to look at it. And it was just hard for me to process. And the more I saw and the more the messaging came out and the more the cases increase on COVID and people are struggling and they're suffering, I just felt like I had to tell the truth. I had to, and there's going to be so many books that get written after this, right? There's going to be amazing stories because there's so much material about this White House. But for me, it was more about the moment is now. Like, if you're going to speak out and you have something to say that really matters, where people need to be informed. They need to know the reality of what's happening here behind closed doors, on how the president feels about them and how he talks about them and the things that he says. And, he doesn't hide it. So it's not like anything's happening, because, he's pretty public about the things that he says, and his behavior is deplorable. But for me, I just felt like I needed to speak out now, because now was the moment that mattered. And, when I look at Joe Biden, and I started my career in the Republican Party. That's where I started at the RNC, and I eventually became a career intelligence officer. But I've seen the damage that the president has done in terms of national security. I've seen how he's demoralized the community that I love, which is the national security and intelligence community. I've seen people I respect at the most senior level who have been fired for telling the truth. And all of that is just not okay. And so I said, I know the risk, I know the career implications that this will have for me, the long-term life implications that it'll have and the consequences, and I'll take them as they come, and I take them one day at a time. And I'm grateful for organizations like you all, where, I feel like I have a community out there, and I have a group of Republicans. I'm not completely alone on this. And, I struggled with it every day from within. And you have these conversations with other Republicans behind closed doors in the White House, and they know it's awful. And I just felt, if I could make a difference, and maybe it'll encourage others, right? That when you come forward, and I will say this, it's somewhat cathartic, because what I've been carrying, the emotion that I feel, and when I talk about this, it's still hard for me. I get emotionally exhausted, because it's so raw and it's so real to me, and I care so much about it. And as far as Joe Biden goes, I look at it for this moment right now in time of where we are as a country. We need to get back to a sense of decency and normalcy. And I do think that he will behave in a manner that is at least presidential, and he understands what it means to be in the Oval Office. He understands the national security implications. He respects that. And that's all I can hope, right? But I know Donald Trump, and I know that 4 more years of him, we won't be the same. We're already not the same of the country that I grew up in. I'm a Mexican-American immigrant. I've pretty much been told this entire administration that I'm the worst thing to happen to America. And I don't think that I am, right? I went on to serve in the
I don't think so either.
Vice President. So for me, that's why. And it's not easy. And I'm certainly getting the hate mail, and threats are coming in, and I still have relationships, some in the White House, and I know that people are judging me every day for this, but I also know that in the back of their heads, they know I'm right. And everything that I'm saying, they've thought of. They've thought it at one moment or another. Maybe not the president. He's probably the only one. But I'm sure that aide who has tested positive for COVID has had some moments of pause at times, being like, is this worth it?
Yeah, you mentioned the Lafayette Square incident or actions. That was really a catalyst for this organization too, Olivia. And, I'm looking to my colleague, Karen, who filed the paperwork the day after, or that night, right, Karen, to form this organization. And it really that was the moment that we as an organization came together as well to speak out in a public forum and say, we need to change, and to throw our support behind Joe Biden. So we share, from the outside looking in, it's horrifying to us to hear your story looking from the inside out, but from the outside looking in, it was pretty horrifying as well. It's already 36 after the hour. There's so many other things I want to talk about. One being the New England Journal of Medicine coming out and supporting a president for the first time in over 200 years.
I think that says a lot.
I agree. And it goes back to, I think, the good work of listening to the experts and the work that you did on the task force and working with the physicians and epidemiologists and the CDC and others, and the need to listen to those experts. And I think that, I can't speak on behalf of the journal, but that had to be a reason why they came out and said, we also agree there cannot be 4 more years of this. We need a change, and Joe Biden's that guy.
You're right.
With that said, I know you mentioned your support for Joe Biden, and we could, like I said, we are very much in favor of Joe Biden's candidacy. I appreciate the words that you mentioned as well, talking about what you feel he'll bring to the table. He made a great speech in Gettysburg a few days ago regarding bringing the nation together and listening to everybody and approaching people with the red MAGA hats and saying, I'm going to be your president too. You worked inside the White House. I can't see that happening at all in this current administration.
No, that's never going to change. The fact that they're running a campaign based on divisiveness, and the fact that, as much as they can try to defend it, this is the most racist group of people I have probably ever worked around. And I'm just going to call it for what it is. I've heard the comments, I've lived it, and it was hurtful for me. There's a reason I went for a walk that day. Yeah. And there's a reason I walked with a friend on the National Security Council. And I needed to really remove myself from the situation, because, it is what it is. And for me, I think, when I look at the Republican Party and I think of President Bush and the appointees there, this is a very different group of people. And I'm struggling. I'm part of Repair. I'm supporting Miles in it, and I'm trying to figure out as a Republican. I mean, I don't even know where I fit. If it's the party of Trump that's the new Republican Party, then that's clearly not a party for me, and that's something that I wrestle with, and I'm just trying to find a home again, I guess.
Well, until the election, we can be your home. You're among friends here, that's for sure. So whatever we can do to help out tell your story and to continue to tell your story, you let us know, and we will be in your corner from now beyond Election Day, and really appreciate the work that you did on the task force and the years of service you've given to the government, as well as your commitment to working for 43, for George W. Bush and his administration with all of us. Very much appreciated too. So with that, Olivia, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time tonight. Know that you are very much in demand by the network. So I don't know if we'll see you later on TV tonight or not. I guess it's always possible, but thank you very much. We really do.
There's always breaking news, apparently.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah.
We'll see what the next surprise is, right? No, thanks a lot. And for those of you who are interested, we actually are planning on having a lit drop, a socially distant lit drop in Pennsylvania coming up, Karen, October 24th.
October 24th, it'll be pretty much an all-day event. We'll probably depart about 8 o'clock and return to DC at 6 o'clock. So stand by. There'll be more details coming forward very shortly.
Check our website, 43alumni4joebiden.com. We'll have information on there for those who want to participate. So Olivia, thanks a lot.
Olivia.
Everybody who joined us, thanks a lot. We'll see you again next time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.